Salve, lower life forms. I'm Nova Caesar, and welcome to my channel. Alright, you all know who this little blue bastard is. If you're a YouTuber who covers anything pop culture related, it seems inevitable that you'll end up having to talk about Sonic the Hedgehog at some point. So I decided to make Sonic the first thing I cover on this channel just so I can get it out of the way. I won't bother with an essay about the current state of the game since it's pretty much a beaten dead horse at this point, and there are other YouTubers who have already covered the subject better than I ever could. As the title and thumbnail suggest, I'm going to be talking about one of the franchise's most controversial adaptations. Now, Sonic the Hedgehog is no stranger to being adapted into different forms of media, from animation to comics and even a theatrical film series, each one with its own unique take on Sonic and his never-ending battle against Dr. Eggman, or Dr. Robotnik depending on the medium. Take for example, Sonic, but he has the personality of Bugs Bunny. Sonic, but he has the personality of a typical Englishman. Sonic and his friends battle an authoritarian regime. Sonic and his siblings battle an authoritarian regime, with the power of music. Sonic winds up in the human world and hijinks ensues. Sonic winds up in the human world and hijinks ensues. But then him and his friends spend an entire season in space.
The signal's coming from a place called Planet Breezy. That sounds cool.
I fucking hate you. There's even a Sonic the Hedgehog musical. Further proof that everything from Australia wants to kill you.
It's about to her day up, and I am about it. Hey! Get him! Get him!
But of all of these reimaginings of the Blue Blur, none stand out in my mind more so than the Sonic the Hedgehog comic series by Archie. You know Riverdale, right? That show no one watches except for mentally devolved millennials? Well, that show is loosely based on one of the longest running comic series ever made. Though best known for their flagship comic, Archie Comics has also dabbled into comics based on other franchises, namely Sonic, Ninja Turtles, and the highly acclaimed Mega Man comic. At the time of this recording, Archie's Sonic the Hedgehog currently holds the Guinness World Record for longest running comic based on a video game. It began its run in 1993 and would continue to tell one cohesive story up until 2013 when, after years of legal issues, the people at Archie were forced to reboot the continuity. Even after the continuity reboot, the comic would continue its run up until the tail end of 2016, with its cancellation announced the following year. That gives the comic a grand total of 290 issues, and that's not even counting all the various specials, miniseries, and spin-offs. Before the comic truly began, Archie had made a 4-part miniseries of the same name, and as the mainline comic went on, other main characters would get their own miniseries, with Knuckles eventually getting his own spin-off comic that ran for 32 issues. Another spin-off comic was Sonic Super Specials, a 15-issue series which told various different stories within 48-page issues. And then there's Sonic Universe, which told mostly 4-part story arcs, usually centered around other characters besides Sonic. Universe would run alongside the main comic until both were cancelled together, giving it a total of 94 issues. For the record, I'm only going to be talking about the pre-reboot continuity for the rest of this video. The post-reboot continuity is a whole other beast in need of a separate set of videos. I also won't be talking about Archie's Sonic X or Sonic Boom comics unless they have relevance to the main continuity. Got all that? Good. Now, to those of you who have read this comic before, or just have secondhand knowledge of it, what are some things that come to your mind when you think Archie Sonic? You probably think of Sonic OCs. Lots and lots and lots of Sonic OCs. You might also think of questionable artistic choices. Green Sonic, Green Knuckles, meme templates, or maybe you just remember it for being weird. And I mean really, really fucking weird. More than likely, you think about former writer Ken Penders and his never-ending claims to infamy. The most notable being his lawsuit against Archie that ultimately resulted in the aforementioned continuity reboot. After hearing all that, the rest of you are probably wondering, is this comic actually good? Well... It's a very ambitious series. The best way I can describe this comic is that it wants to be and do everything. So what is this comic about exactly? Inspired by the Sad AM cartoon, Sonic is part of a team of heroes called the Freedom Fighters, led by his on and off again girlfriend, Princess Sally Acorn. Together they protect the kingdom of Acorn as well as the rest of Planet Mobius from the tyranny of Dr. Eggman, among other threats. Archie Sonic began its run as a gag comic, episodic and never taking itself seriously, though this would change as the series progressed. Overarching plot threads, more elements from the Sad AM cartoon, and comic exclusive lore were all woven in, giving the series much more depth. Over the years, the tone of the comics would also shift, causing Archie Sonic to go from being one of the most light-hearted Sonic series to one of the darkest. Even after the tone shift, the comic would still tell goofy stories from time to time, like that one issue where Sonic finds a genie in a bottle. Sometimes it'll adapt stories or story elements from the games, like the multi-part Sonic Adventure adaptation. Sometimes it'll tell extremely outlandish stories, like whenever Sonic has to help defend the multiverse. And sometimes it'll tell more serious stories or tackle big themes like racism, public hysteria, ethnic cleansing, science versus religion, tradition versus change, and domestic abuse. And sometimes it'll be a cheesy teen drama full of love triangles and misunderstandings. Blech. Though the comics had a fair number of writers, the four most responsible for shaping Archie Sonic were Mike Gallagher, Ken Penders, Carl Bollers, and Ian Flynn. While Penders is widely considered infamous among the Sonic fandom, Flynn on the other hand is highly revered by most. At the time of this recording, Ian Flynn continues to be greatly involved in the Sonic franchise. Just to name a few of his credits, he wrote for the Archie series from issue 160 all the way up until its cancellation, and then went on to write for the IDW comics, the Sonic Encyclopedia, and even the story for Sonic Frontiers. The first big difference the comic has from the games is the cast. Everyone is here. Archie Sonic is very fanservice heavy and utilizes the full extent of the Sonic franchise, or at least what SEGA allows the writers to use. The cast of the SATM cartoon star as main characters, with Snively and Naga serving as reoccurring villains. Characters from the Adventures cartoon make sparse appearances. This comic kept Mighty and Ray around even after SEGA left them on the curbside for several years. And when was the last time you saw these guys in a game? And how many of you even know who these guys even are? Because the multiverse is a thing, Sonic goes to the Sonic Underground universe during an issue of Super Specials, and later on, Shadow and Metal Sonic stumble into the Sonic X universe during that comic's final issue. Styx from the Sonic Boom universe also meets the main continuity's cast, but that's post-reboot, so we'll ignore it for now. There's even a few nods to the OVA series in the Fleetway comic. Archie Sonic has a large slew of comic original characters, and although it is fun to ridicule Sonic OCs, some of these characters are actually pretty cool. This is also one of the few incarnations of Sonic to give the game characters family members. Sonic has parents and an uncle, yes his dad is a robot. Tails also has parents and an uncle, yes his uncle is a wizard. That teal colored Robin Hood hedgehog you saw before is Amy's cousin. Knuckles has divorced parents and a baby brother from his mom's second marriage, and at one point his daughter from the future arrives. Speaking of which, a major departure from the games is Archie's portrayal of Knuckles, simultaneously one of the most iconic and one of the most infamous parts about the comics. In the beginning, he starts out fairly similar to his game counterpart, but once he got his own spin-off comic, things took a huge turn for him. The Knuckles comic would answer the question that the games to this day have never answered. What happened to Knuckles, people, and why is he the last one? Since the writers had so much creative control at the time, and because there wasn't much to Knuckles as a character during the mid-90s, Ken Penders went balls to the walls with developing not only Knuckles' character, but also the other echidnas he had become estranged to. In the Archie series, Knuckles is no longer the last of his kind like in most incarnations, and throughout the course of the pre-reboot continuity's run, the history and culture of the echidnas, as well as Knuckles' own role as Guardian, becomes heavily fleshed out. In this version of the Sonic mythos, Knuckles is part of a long bloodline of Guardians dating back to a distant ancestor. We learn along with him the history of his people and even his own origin that he never knew. This in turn gives him an ongoing character arc of self-discovery. And to give credit where it's due, I actually love these ideas, or at least the superficial concepts. But because Ken Penders was free to do as he pleased, he would take Knuckles and the rest of the echidnas to some interesting places, to say the least. For example, Knuckles' family has a centuries-long blood feud with the Dark Legion, an army of technology fetishizing echidna cyborgs, whose leaders are also distant relatives of Knuckles. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to the beginning. In the early years of the main Sonic comic, we learned small pieces about the echidnas and the floating island. We learned that at one time there was a technologically advanced city called Echidnaopolis that disappeared long ago. As the centuries passed, Knuckles and his father became the apparent last survivors of their race, until one day Knuckles' father disappeared as well. While on a quest with Tails, Knuckles meets his great-grandfather for the first time, but he doesn't tell Knuckles anything about the echidnas. At least not yet. It wouldn't be until the beginning of the Knuckles solo comic when we would finally get our answers. During the first 2 story arcs, the barriers between dimensions become weakened enough to where the Dark Legion is finally able to escape from the prison dimension that another one of Knuckles' ancestors had trapped him in centuries ago. This weakening of dimensional barriers also causes Echidnaopolis to return to the floating island, and Knuckles finally learns the reason behind the disappearance of his people. So what happened to them, and why was Knuckles the last Echidna on the floating island? Well, you see, centuries ago, the Echidnas were at war with Nazi dingoes who unleashed nuclear weapons upon Echidnaopolis. The Guardian at the time managed to save the city from the explosions, but in order to protect his people from radioactive fallout, he sealed the city and its inhabitants in another dimension. There they intended to remain until the island could be cleansed of its radiation, but in the end they were never able to return the city to the island. And that's only scratching the surface with Echidna lore. When Knuckles finally reunites with his father in the 25th issue, Knuckles learns that he's actually a mutant super Echidna, made that way to prevent a future apocalypse. After the comic's cancellation, Knuckles' story would continue in the main Sonic comic, and that plot thread about him being a mutant Echidna leads to an entire story arc where he transforms into a living Chaos Emerald with the power to control time and space. This arc is finally resolved when he fucking dies. Spoilers. He spends a brief time in the afterlife, but then chooses to come back to life in order to help save the world from alien invaders. His resurrection then leads to another story arc where many other Echidnas believe him to be the messiah of their religion, all while Eggman and the Dingoes are genociding their people. I did say Archie Sonic was weird, didn't I? Ian Flynn would also make his own additions to the Echidnas and their lore, some of which are even darker than what Penders had done. But due to Penders' lawsuit and Sega's intervention, everything about the Echidnas had to be scrapped, leaving Knuckles on an extremely bitter note before the reboot. Then after the reboot, Knuckles becomes exactly like his game counterpart down to a T.
Hello.
Though Knuckles will frequently team up with Sonic and the Freedom Fighters, he also has his own team in the form of the Chaotix. Rather than the trio of goofy detectives that we're familiar with from the games, the Archie Chaotix are a team of heroes akin to the Freedom Fighters led by Knuckles. With a title like Knuckles Chaotix, and with little knowledge of the Japanese intent, it's only natural for the writers to assume that Knuckles was meant to be the leader of the team. And to be honest, I actually prefer this dynamic over the games. I like the idea of Knuckles doing his own thing with his own team, only partnering up with Sonic whenever need be. It gives him more agency, making him an equal to Sonic rather than just being sidekick number 2. The Archie Chaotix is a much larger team than its game counterpart, with 8 members in total. Heavy and Bomb leave the team immediately after it's formed, so I don't count them. Since Knuckles leads the team, this does mean a lot of Vector's agency isn't present in the comics. Instead, Vector serves as second in command, only taking charge whenever Knuckles is away. Archie Vector has some similarities to Game Vector, but is also much more ill-tempered and resentful. This attitude of his goes deep with Ken Pender's OC, Julie Sue. Julie Sue is an Echidna girl who defects from the Dark Legion, joins the Chaotix shortly afterwards, and then later becomes Knuckles' girlfriend and future baby mama. As a character, she's fine, I guess. I don't love her character, but I don't hate her either. She's just eh. She and Vector have a long-running rivalry with each other, stemming from the fact that they first met as enemies. Well, that and also because Vector is one of those guys who gets jealous that his best friend has a girlfriend and keeps hanging out with her instead of him. One character change I love is with Espio. For a good chunk of the comics run, he's pretty bland. But after Ian Flynn takes over as head writer, Espio's character gets heavily retconned. Flynn would take the ninja motif that Sonic Heroes had introduced to the next level, revealing that Espio has been a member of a ninja clan all along, sent to spy on Knuckles just as other members of his clan had done to previous Guardians. He's not just a guy who acts like a ninja, he actually is one. Out of the 3 Chaotix that we're most familiar with, the one with the biggest difference in character portrayal is Charmy. In the comics, he's much older than he is in the games, and even has a fiancé named Saffron, who eventually joins the Chaotix herself after circumstances. Archie Charmy is, or was, the prince of a kingdom of bees who initially joined the Chaotix because he was running away from his responsibilities. Naturally, he has a more mature personality compared to the 6-year-old with a 24/7 caffeine rush. That is until... I'll talk about this later. Since the Archie Chaotix were initially based on the lineup from the 32X game, Mighty has been on the team since the beginning. Mighty is a decent character. He serves as the main muscle on the team, even more so than Knuckles or Vector. He's laid back and easygoing, but whenever he sees the people closest to him get hurt, he snaps and turns into an unstoppable berserker. Presumably, Penders eventually learned about the Japanese exclusive arcade game that Mighty originally debuted in, and thus Ray would make his way into the comics. Ray is the kid of the team, and a little brother figure to Mighty, much like the relationship between Sonic and Tails. He was also given this vocal quirk to where he stutters so bad that it makes his text bubbles unbearable to read. Now let's talk about the Freedom Fighters. The lineup is the same as the SatAM cartoon, except in the comics, Tails was always a member, Bunny joins in the 3rd issue, and new members come and go. In addition to the main team, there's also several other Freedom Fighter groups who appear across the comics run, fighting evil in their respective parts of the world. The Freedom Fighters from the SatAM cartoon are each fleshed out, each with their own backstories and additional family members. Sally's overall likability really comes down to who's riding her, a discussion which is better left for future videos. Rotor remains mostly the same as in the cartoon. The only real difference is that he's originally from Mobius's equivalent to the North Pole, where his family and people are continuously on the receiving end of the Doctor's tyranny. Bunny is handled pretty well throughout the entire run. Unlike the cartoon, rather than being a childhood friend of Sonic and Sally's, she originally hails from the Kingdom of Acorn's southern desert land, only becoming a freedom fighter after Sonic and Rotor save her from being roboticized. Antoine is a much different character than his SatAM counterpart, and for the better. He starts off as the team's butt monkey, like in the cartoon, but he's also shown to be much more courageous and willing to take action. As the comic progresses, Antoine becomes a very capable hero despite his own insecurities. Also, unlike cartoon Antoine, Archie Antoine gives up on trying to pursue Sally and starts a relationship with Bunny. The two eventually get married and become the only pairing in the entire Sonic franchise worth giving a shit about. Dulcie the Dragon is there. Sometimes. The one with the most character growth has to be Nicole. Starting out as just an advanced AI, she evolves both figuratively and literally as the comics progress, becoming a 3-dimensional character with wants and emotions. She even goes so far as to create a physical body for herself so she can interact with people. She's definitely one of the best parts about the comics in terms of character portrayal. However, the best part about Archie Sonic is hands down its portrayal of Dr. Eggman. Good lord, this motherfucker is evil. The writers took his villainy from the games and amped it all the way up, making him an absolute monster with no redeeming qualities, and it is glorious. In the beginning, Eggman, or should I say Robotnik, starts off as a bumbling, dim-witted buffoon of a villain who hates plants, music, and having fun. Fitting for that era of the comics run, but in hindsight you wonder how this imbecile managed to conquer anything in the first place, and keep his grip on the world for as long as he did. However, as the comics slowly took on a darker tone, he too in return would slowly become a more imposing villain. But then he dies. Spoilers. After his demise, he gets replaced by Eggman, another version of Robotnik from an alternate timeline, continuing the fight against Sonic as if the last guy were back from the dead. So yeah, in this version of the Sonic mythos, Eggman is Robotnik, but Robotnik isn't necessarily Eggman. So what can I say about Archie Eggman? He's sadistic, psychopathic, a mass murderer. He craves destruction and conquest and revels in the suffering he inflicts on others. However, despite being pure evil, he still manages to maintain an air of humor around him, like most other incarnations of the character. With a cartoonish level of narcissism, accompanied with his psychopathic behavior and ever-dominating demeanor, Eggman is always a fun character whenever he appears. One thing Archie did better than the games was making the Eggman Empire feel like an actual empire. He has conquered territory around the world, and people who serve under him. Some willingly for their own selfish gain, some reluctantly for their own survival, but most of the time they're just innocent people converted into cybernetic slaves, stripped of their free will. Archie Eggman is easily up there among my favorite fictional villains, but no one can top my boy Palpy. One of the most well-known parts of the Archie series is the addition of Sonic's evil counterpart from a Dark Mirror universe. In the beginning, evil Sonic, or anti-Sonic as I prefer to say, would cause the good Sonic grief from time to time, usually by impersonating him or causing trouble for the multiverse, but overall he was pretty much a pushover. Like Espio, he would be done greater justice under Ian Flynn's run. After getting a power boost from the Master Emerald, Anti-Sonic becomes the fan-favorite character Scourge the Hedgehog. Now a much more interesting and competent villain who can truly challenge Sonic. Scourge even manages to steal Sonic's girlfriend at the time with his wicked charisma. Underneath his bad boy exterior, however, lies an irate sociopath. Scourge aspires for greatness, but is forever held down by his own rotten personality. Ask anyone who's read the comic before, and they'll probably tell you that Scourge is one of, if not the best of the Archie original characters. While we're on the subject of villains, I should probably talk about the other villains of the comics. Sonic and Knuckles have had a large variety of enemies throughout the years. Of course, we have the ones from the games, as well as the cartoons, but there's also several comic original villains. There's Scourge's goons, the Anti-Freedom Fighters, later rebranded as the Suppression Squad, the aforementioned echidna cyborgs and Nazi dingoes, Mammoth Mogul, an immortal sorcerer who's existed since Mobius's Stone Age, the Iron Queen, a witch who uses magic to control technology, Enerjack, the spirit of an echidna demigod who bestows its host with unlimited power and also dresses them in a flamboyant pharaoh costume. The first time we see Enerjack, the host is Knuckles' ancestor and reoccurring nemesis Dimitri, and even Knuckles himself becomes Enerjack at one point. Thrash the Tasmanian Devil. In a nutshell, he's like the MCU version of Killmonger, but done right. There's this hunter guy who wants to put Knuckles' head on his wall. There's the reoccurring douchebags, Fiona Fox, Drago Wolf, Lightning Lynx, Sleuth Dog, Flying Frog, Predator Hawk, and Sergeant Simeon. And my personal favorite Archie original villain, Dr. Finitivus, a narcissistic echidna scientist with a holier-than-thou complex who believes that everyone else is evil, and the only way to save the world is to burn it down. Something that I find neat about the Archie series is that just about every robot Sonic that you can think of appears in some shape or form. The first one we see is Pseudo Sonic, originally from the Adventures cartoon. He makes his debut early in the comics run, sent by Robotnik to infiltrate the Freedom Fighters HQ, but Tails easily defeats him with science. 161 issues later, Pseudo Sonic finally returns, now part of a team of other outdated badniks, and finally gets to face off with the real Sonic. Pseudo makes one last appearance a few issues later, where his comrades turn him into a giant. But after a fight with the Ocean Freedom Fighters, they wind up crushed into a cube. Sonic 2's Mecha Sonic appears in the form of Silver Sonic versions 1 and 3, both serving as soldiers aboard their respective Death Egg. Silver Sonic 2, on the other hand, is based on that one robot Sonic that appears in Eggman's base in Sonic Adventure. He debuts at the end of the comic Sonic Adventure adaptation, sent by Eggman to finish what Chaos started. But after being defeated by Sonic, he's reprogrammed as Station Square's new guardian. Silver Sonic 2 makes one last appearance during the Sonic Adventure 2 adaptation, where Shadow destroys him with minimal effort. Although the Mecha Sonic from Sonic & Knuckles doesn't technically appear in the pre-reboot continuity, Sonic's roboticized form, also called Mecha Sonic, has some visual similarities to it, so it's likely that this is intended to be the pre-reboot's incarnation of that robot. The first time Sonic is roboticized into Mecha Sonic, his mind is under Robotnik's control and sent to destroy Knothole. But after a fight with a roboticized Knuckles, the two of them are restored to normal. Sonic becomes Mecha Sonic one more time later in the series, but this time he gets to keep his free will. In this story, Sonic and Tails are roboticized by aliens, and in order to be changed back, they must take part in an experiment that involves fighting and utterly humiliating Eggman and Snively. At one point in the series, Sally's father commissions Sonic's Uncle Chuck and Rotor to build an army of robot Sonics dubbed the Metal Sonic Troopers, whose designs are an obvious homage to Neo Metal Sonic. A mysterious entity discovers the troopers and reprograms them to attack both the villains and heroes alike. In the end, the troopers are finally brought down by the combined efforts of Sonic, Knuckles, SBO, Mighty, and Shadow. Though I regret to inform you, that fight is not as cool as I might have made it sound. As for the main man himself, Metal Sonic first appears in the comic's very loose adaptation of Sonic CD, displaying much more personality than most incarnations of the character. He challenges Sonic to a race across Stardust Speedway in order for the latter to save Amy and Tails, but Metal's body begins to melt as he tries to catch up to Sonic's super peel-out. He returns during the equally as loose Knuckles Chaotix adaptation, where he assumes his giant form from the game, only to be taken down by a giant Knuckles. Metal Sonic doesn't make another appearance until the epilogue of the SA1 adaptation, returning to exact his revenge on Sonic. By the end of their rematch, however, Metal Sonic has a change of heart and chooses to sacrifice himself so that Sonic and Tails could escape from an erupting volcano. Afterwards, Eggman would start a line of Metal Sonics, each one completely obedient to their master and lacking in the original's free will. Every time the current Metal Sonic gets destroyed, he builds a new one immediately afterwards to take its place. He even has a line of Titan Metal Sonics and Silver Sonics to boot. In addition to all the robot Sonics, Eggman also builds both Metal Knuckles and that creepypasta from Sonic R, along with a proper Metal Tails, a Metal Amy, and a Metal Scourge. Yeah, I think he might just be a wee bit obsessed with his enemies. Despite being melted in lava, the original Metal Sonic manages to survive thanks to the gem that powers his body. His gem is recovered and rebuilt into a new body based off of Eggman Nega's Metal Sonic from Sonic Rivals 2. Now going by the new name Shard and eager to prove himself a hero, he joins a new team of freedom fighters who operate while the Kingdom of Acorn is under the tyranny of Nagus. During the tail end of the pre-reboot continuity, Shard fights the latest version of Metal Sonic, who's been implanted with all the memories of his predecessors. We get a pretty badass fight between the two robot Sonics, but in the end, things don't go well for Shard. As for the other game characters, Tails is for the most part the same as his game counterpart, with the added bonus of being a prophesized chosen one destined to bring about the Great Harmony. Now, what the Great Harmony is even supposed to be depends on the writer. Amy starts out simply as a fangirl of Sonic's. She wants to join the Freedom Fighters, but is always turned down due to her age and lack of experience. So she steals a magic ring to age herself into a teenager, giving an explanation for why she goes from her classic design to her modern. However, even after aging herself up, she still has to prove herself worthy before she can finally become a freedom fighter. She's still boy crazy for Sonic like in the games, but she doesn't force herself on him. She actually cares what Sonic wants rather than what she wants exclusively. Shadow is also one of those characters who never really got good until Ian Flynn's run. The comics adaptation of Sonic Adventure 2's story gets several parts glossed over, so we hardly get a look at what made Shadow such a compelling character when he debuted in the games. The Archie series does its own version of that story arc where Shadow tries to uncover the secrets of his past, while uncertain whether to ally with good or evil, but overall, he's just not that interesting. However, once Shadow learns why he was created, and then later joins Gun, he becomes a much better character, even more so than his modern game counterpart. A lot of this has to do with Ian Flynn's writing. He actually gets Shadow. He understands what makes him such a good character, more so than the modern writers at SEGA do. He's not Edgy the Hedgy, or cheap bootleg Vegeta. Instead, like Mighty, Archie Shadow is a chill guy, only snapping if pushed hard enough. He sincerely cares about doing the right thing, but often questions his own ability to do so. Being the ultimate life form created to be the planet's protector puts a lot of pressure on him. Archie Shadow doesn't have the same petty disdain for Sonic like Game Shadow has been shown to have in recent years. Though he and Sonic aren't exactly friends, they both still share a strong mutual respect for each other. He can also make other facial expressions besides scowling, so that's a definite plus. Silver is kinda hit and miss, though we never actually see it. According to the comics encyclopedia, the events of Sonic 06 also happen in the Archie series. And just like in the game, the events are all erased from history at the end of the story, leaving everybody with no memory of what happened. Although Silver's future world is now saved from Iblis, it still remains a post-apocalyptic wasteland, this time caused by one of the freedom fighters becoming a turncoat in the past. And for whatever reason, no one ever bothered to rebuild the world in 200 years. His first few appearances during the present day consist of him trying and failing to exterminate whichever freedom fighter he thinks is the culprit. As a character, when he's a badass, he's a badass. But whenever he acts foolishly, the comic treats him like a fucking tool. It's as if Ian Flynn was trying to write him as a parody of 06 Silver. He does end up joining the same freedom fighter group that Shard is on, so that's cool. There are more game characters like Blaze, Marine, Big, Rouge, Omega, and so forth, but we'll be here all day if I go over each one, so let's move on. Now let's talk about the star himself. Sonic is a much more three-dimensional character compared to how he normally is in the games. He still has that snarky, laid-back, egotistical, but still heroic personality that we're all familiar with. However, in the comics, he also experiences much more negative emotions, such as hopelessness, jealousy, guilt, and on multiple occasions, Sonic has straight up snapped at people, and not just his enemies, but also his own allies. In my personal opinion, these flaws in his character make Archie Sonic a much more interesting protagonist compared to his typically static game counterpart. This comic series also explores Sonic's love life much more than any other incarnation of the franchise. Being the kind of guy that Sonic is, it makes sense that he'd be quite the ladies' man. Though Sonic has multiple love interests, it's pretty clear that the title of Best Girl goes to Sass. Sally. However, their relationship is forcefully made complicated by the writers, teasing their readers with Ross and Rachel levels of will they not, despite it being pretty damn obvious that they will. The pre-reboot continuity has many storylines over its long run worth mentioning. First, there's Mecha Madness, a short story arc where Sonic is captured and roboticized, becoming Robotnik's obedient slave, Mecha Sonic. Robotnik sends his new slave to destroy Knothole Village, where he proceeds to mop the floor with both Bunny and Knuckles. Knuckles willingly roboticizes himself, but with his free will still intact, becoming Mecha Knuckles. Mecha Sonic and Mecha Knuckles then proceed to beat each other up Dragon Ball Z style, all while the reader gets to gaze in awe at the gorgeous artwork by Patrick Spazianti. In a one-off special, Sonic and Knuckles get into a fight that leads to them unearthing a portal to another dimension full of rings and Chaos Emeralds. They continue their fight in this new dimension, assume their super forms, and then beat each other up so badly that they obliterate the entire dimension. When the writers weren't sure if they'd get to continue the series or not, we got the Endgame arc. In this story, Sonic is framed for attempting to murder Sally and has to go on the run from his own people. Meanwhile, Robotnik builds the Ultimate Annihilator, a weapon capable of wiping matter clean out of existence, along with whatever other bullshit side effect the plot needs it to cause. After clearing his name, Sonic heads for Robotropolis to confront Robotnik. Having believed that Robotnik succeeded in using his new weapon to destroy Knothole and its inhabitants, we got the final battle between Sonic and his arch-nemesis. Also during the story arc, Sonic goes to Knuckles Island and the two proceed to beat each other up. Yeah, in the early years, the writer's idea of making Sonic and Knuckles rivals was to have them fight nearly every time one ended up in the other's line of vision. A story arc that I personally have very fond memories of is the Iron Dominion arc. After another final battle, Eggman loses his sanity from too many defeats at the hands of Sonic and is temporarily put out of commission. Snively then gives the keys to the Eggman Empire to his new girlfriend, the Iron Queen. The Iron Queen then proceeds to go to war with the Kingdom of Acorn and eventually manages to conquer its new capital city. Before taking over the Empire, however, the Iron Queen had also taken command of multiple ninja clans, one of which SBO happens to secretly be a part of, causing him to be torn between his friendships and his sense of duty. Another story arc that I personally love is the Egg Scrambled arc from Sonic Universe. Snively defects from the Eggman Empire and goes on the run to reunite with the Iron Queen, with Eggman tailing him along the way. Before Snively leaves, he tricks all of Eggman's generals into believing that their leader had died and that the Empire had fallen. That leads to this brilliant scene where Eggman summons all his generals in for an emergency meeting. Most of the generals believe that they were free from Eggman's iron grip, but then the good doctor proceeds to hammer it in that they are all slaves for life, all while gleefully threatening to kill any who stand up to him and making it clear that every single one of them is expendable. But then that same issue ends with him flying off in an airship shaped like his own mustache. This entire arc gives you a very thorough look at Eggman's personality, from his hilarity to his outright cruelty. A great read for newcomers is the Treasure Team Tango arc, also from Sonic Universe. Amy and Cream volunteer to help Blaze search for one of her missing Soul Emeralds, which leads into a four-way battle against Team Dark, the Babylon Rogues, and Sonic Team's abandoned trio for possession of the Emerald. Though Amy, Cream, and Blaze are the stars of this story, Shadow, Bean, and Omega easily steal the show. Another good read for newcomers is the Genesis arc. With the power of a Chaos Emerald and his new Death Egg, Eggman proceeds to fuck up the space-time continuum the first time, and Mobius temporarily becomes a recreation of the first two games on the Genesis. And then, of course, there's Worlds Collide, Sonic's first crossover with Mega Man. In this storyline, Dr. Eggman and Dr. Wily meet each other for the first time and quickly develop a strong bromance. The two doctors proceed to fuck up the space-time continuum of their respective universes and trick Sonic and Mega Man into fighting each other. Once the latter two realize that they're on the same side, Sonic and Mega Man team up to save both of their realities. Sonic's friends get captured and roboticized into a new line of robot masters, which Sonic and Mega Man have to defeat in order to save. Then the heroes of both series unite to fight a horde of robot masters from all throughout the Mega Man franchise. Sonic and Mega Man manage to enter the Doctor's Flying Fortress, and after a battle with their evil doppelgangers, and a fusion of Chaos and Yellow Devil, the two of them face the Doctors. Eggman and Wily reveal their plan to use all 7 Chaos Emeralds to rewrite both of their universes, with them as their respective gods. Sonic and Mega Man manage to use the Emeralds first, becoming Super Sonic and Super Mega Man, and finally defeating the Doctors. But then shit hits the fan when the two heroes go to work restoring their respective universes. Mega Man uses Chaos Control to successfully restore his universe to how it was, but Sonic isn't so lucky with his. Eggman fires at Sonic's Chaos Control, creating a chain reaction that collapses and rewrites the entire Archie Sonic multiverse. And so, Eggman fucks up the space-time continuum for the third and final time, causing the in-universe explanation for the continuity reboot. Eggman was completely willing to destroy the universe, all because he refused to let Sonic screw him out of his ultimate victory. He's such an awesome villain. There's also a second crossover, Worlds Unite, which not only has Sonic and Mega Man characters, but also characters from Sonic Boom and Mega Man X. But that's post-reboot, so we're gonna ignore it for now. Now let's go over some of the stranger highlights of the comics. I've already talked about a lot of them, but here's just a few more before I close out this video. These range from fascinatingly bizarre to just outright retarded. There exists a parallel universe where Sonic is Batman, another where Sally is Sailor Moon, another with a Robotnik version of Galactus, and another where the heroes are all kaiju. And to top that off, the entire Archie Sonic multiverse is patrolled by a police force, who all stand sideways due to being natives of a perpendicular universe. There's a span of time in the comics where Eggman has a robot daughter with obvious visual cues from the Terminator. This exists. There's these guys and their accidental involvement in the creation of Planet Mobius due to not knowing the side effects of their own weapons. I'll talk more about them in a future video. There's that one time the Chaotix tripped out after eating chili dogs laced with acid. I'm not making any of this shit up, by the way. So far, this video may have given you the impression that I'm some sort of Ian Flynn fanboy, but far from it. Though I personally think he's the best writer Archie Sonic ever had, Flynn was still prone to bad writing and outright idiotic ideas, the worst offender being what he did to poor Charmy. One of the things that Flynn set out to do when becoming head writer was to make the comic lore line up more with the game lore. Most of the time it worked out, but other times not so much. As I had also said before, Archie Charmy is older and more mature-minded than Game Charmy. So how does Flynn change this? By having Eggman fry Charmy's brain, causing him to behave childishly and forget most of his life. In other words, in an attempt to make Archie Charmy more game accurate, Ian Flynn made him mentally retarded.
Didn't think that one through, did you?
This never gets resolved, by the way, even though Flynn himself had established that chaos energy can be used to heal both brain damage and memory loss. Another really odd part of the comic is its in-universe explanations for why Sonic and Robotnik get redesigned. You might have thought that Sonic going from his classic to modern design was just simply a redesign. He either retroactively always had his modern design, or like with Sonic Generations, you're just not supposed to think about it. Nope. After the endgame arc, Robotnik's Ultimate Annihilator had moved not whole 3 hours into the future, and so Sonic uses a Super Emerald to realign his time-displaced village with the proper flow of time, all while a planet-destroying energy beam is chasing after him. The end result turns his eyes green, makes his hair longer, and magically puts buckles on his shoes. How does Robotnik go from his SAT-AM design to his modern game design? Well, you see, the Robotnik we follow up until the endgame arc dies fighting Sonic. But then a roboticized version of himself from an alternate timeline arrives shortly afterwards. This Robotnik successfully killed his own Sonic and moved to the main timeline wanting to do it all over again. Then he gets blown up, but escapes death by downloading his consciousness into a new robot body. This new Robotnik, now also known as Eggman, gets blown up a few more times, jumping into new robot bodies, until he's finally made flesh again after he, Snively, Sonic, and Tails are abducted by the same aliens that roboticized the latter two. The final thing I want to address is Sonic's other crossovers before Mega Man. Sonic has done multiple crossovers with Sabrina the Teenage Witch, another Archie property. However, words cannot describe just how much I don't care, so don't expect me to talk too much about it in the future. Though not technically a crossover, the Ninja Turtles do make a brief cameo in an early issue, having apparently stumbled out of their own comic by mistake. Archie had its own Ninja Turtles comic at the time, and I love both franchises, so I'm going to count it as a crossover anyway. However, the title for strangest crossover has to go to the one between Sonic and the heroes of Image Comics. That's right, Sonic and his friends meet Spawn, but it's nowhere near as cool as it sounds. Just as icing on top, this comic special is also a quasi-crossover with the X-Files. I repeat, I am not making any of this shit up. So to answer my question from before, is this comic actually good? No. It's batshit insane and I fucking love it. And so I've decided to take you, the viewers, through the wild ride that is Archie Sonic. I'll be doing a multi-part retrospective of the entire pre-reboot Archie Sonic series from start to finish, including all the various specials, miniseries, and spin-offs. And then I'll cap off this retrospective by taking a look at Archie Sonic Online, a fan-made continuation of the original continuity. Oh dear Jupiter, what am I getting myself into? Now before I end this video, I want to make a few things clear. 1. As of now, I'm not certain if I want to cover the post-reboot continuity or not. It's not that I don't like it, it's just that I don't have any attachment for it like I do with the original continuity. I might eventually cover it, but due to how it more or less ignores the old continuity, it'll be part of a separate retrospective series. 2. I have no desire to cover Archie's Sonic X or Sonic Boom comics, except for whenever they tie into the main Archie series. 3. Apart from Ken Penders being trigger happy with his lawsuits, I have no desire to talk about any other drama from behind the scenes. And 4. Any and all criticisms I throw towards the comics writers and artists will be based solely on their abilities as writers and artists. With all that out of the way, thanks for stopping by. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and hit subscribe if you want to see more. Next time, I'll start things off by taking you guys back to the beginning of the beginning.